Jordan Carter, thank you for joining me today on Acquiring Minds.
Thanks for having me, Will. Good to be back.
Jordan, you're a partner at Search Investment Group, SIG. Regular listeners will probably recognize the SIG name. Your partner, Robert Graham, was in the recent debate about self-funded search versus traditional search funds, which got some attention. And you and Robert together were actually on an early episode of Acquiring Minds, talking about self-funded search, advocating for self-funded search. It's a big part of your philosophy as it pertains to search. So I'm sure we'll get into that, but really the headline for today is about your own search. You are a former searcher and CEO of the business that you acquired. And that business is called B&A. It's in the grant space. So grant research, grant writing, grant administration. And you'll tell us more about B&A in a minute. But your search was long and difficult. And it really informed how you feel about self-funded search and the work that you do now helping and investing in other searchers via SIG. So with that stage set there, Jordan, please start us off with a quick bio on you.
Sure. Well, so I grew up in North Texas and went to school, undergrad at Southern Methodist University, SMU in Dallas. Didn't know what I was going to do when I graduated, so I did what a lot of undergrads do, and they go into business. They study undergrad business if possible. One of the highest optionality career paths out of that undergrad is investment banking. So I went to go do that for a few years. Moved on into private equity investing. Both of those stints were in New York. And then did business school for my MBA at Wharton. And then came back to Dallas to search full time to acquire a company. Bought it in the middle of 2020. So July 31st, 2020. So that's the high level, quick and dirty background.
Great. And tell me how you discovered search, or, bridge the gap between living in New York, working in PE, to moving back to North Texas or to Dallas and searching.
Yeah. So I actually first discovered about search funds, period, just the word search, from a colleague when I was in private equity. He was actually looking at going into business school to do an MBA. And I asked him what he was going to do there, and he passed me the search fund study to take a look at, and I just was enthralled. I didn't know that was a possibility. I had only known at that point what I had known, which is finance. I was working in there for several years, and I figured you're just going to have to just climb that ladder and continue to build experience over time. And at the same time, I had read stories about people like Steve Schwartzman, the founder of Blackstone, at age, I think it was 28, where he founded Blackstone. He was a managing director of Lehman Brothers back in the day. So there was a time in our recent history where people were younger and were entrepreneurial, and they were encouraged to take those risks. And I believe search funds is an avenue through which, over the past few decades, it has enabled that drive to be expressed. And it's just the people who look at this and get excited about it. I think that's what's happening. They're tapping into that underlying drive. So for me, that was where I first heard about it. And I went on to business school to spend time and make sure that was the right path for me. Because it was the first time in my life I experienced something where I felt a calling. I felt like this was it.
And you went into business school with an eye on search. Your attention was on search, and you were going to figure this thing out if it was for you.
Yeah, absolutely. So I tried to triangulate it through a couple different ways. So I thought, do I just like operations? Is that what I think is interesting about it? Or is it really the risk and associated reward of stepping into a business and having ultimate responsibility for everything? Failure, it's your fault every single time as the business owner. Was that it? Or was it I just wanted to be, in operations? Because in private equity, I did enjoy spending time with the management teams after we bought the company. I would say, can I go spend time over there? And they said, no, we have to go do another deal, another acquisition. Because when you're on the investing team, that's your job. And no matter what people say in private equity, unless you're deployed at the company every single day, you're not getting operational experience. Yeah.
But so you were drawn to operations. So, and what did you conclude? That you liked both the operations and the risk reward profile of search?
Well, I did an internship with a private equity portfolio operations group. So I directly tested that out, and that was definitely not for me. It was an okay internship, but once again, you're slotted right in the middle of a company. You're helping senior leaders out to drive certain initiatives, but somebody else and another group of people really are making those calls. And the real eye-opening point, Will, was when I sat down with essentially my principal over that summer internship, and I asked him, I said, what do you want to do in 5 or 10 years? And I didn't tell him anything about what my career aspirations were or thoughts at that point. And he looked at me and said, I want to go buy a small business and run it as a full-time CEO, owner, operator. And I just left that day and I just thought, wow, if that's not a sign, I don't know what else is. I was trying to kind of see, was it operations? Is it really search funds? Which one is it? And the portfolio operations group guy was telling me he wants to go do a search fund, essentially.
Yeah, that's excellent. And you got into business way back in undergrad, as you said, because it was kind of didn't know what else you wanted to do. So you probably weren't somebody that saw themselves as an entrepreneur early in life, or even into undergrad, or maybe even shortly after undergrad. But as the search idea, you were exposed to it, and the possibility of it really crystallized. Clearly, that entrepreneurial aspect of it is, in fact, I think in a word, that's really kind of what drew you, is that it's entrepreneurial. Is that fair? And so now I suspect you do see yourself as an entrepreneur.
Yeah. So if I look back, I did give a high level overview, but in high school, I started a business in myself and used PayPal as the payment medium, doing kind of customized computers back when the PC world was a little bit more entrepreneurial. There's all sorts of little brands starting up, and I didn't know how to do it. I didn't know how to put together the chips or solder chips or assemble all the boards inside of a desktop PC. But I found people through forums that did, and I put together a website and put together kind of the payment platform and the marketing and advertising to make that a thing. It never got big, but it was definitely good money for a high schooler. So I certainly had that entrepreneurial drive to do something. I was proud of that company. I was proud of what we were able to do, even if it was only, let's say a couple $1,000s, over a relatively short period of time. But certainly going to college and getting into kind of that track of everybody else is going towards finance. Everyone's the top of the class in the undergrad business school was going into investment banking, and the prestige of that. I was certainly at that time, without really knowing what else I wanted to do, drawn toward it. So that was my foray into the woods, and I came back out of it and found what I truly do believe has been my calling. And I'm very blessed to have made it through that or across that chasm. Yeah.
Well, there were still many other challenges yet to come before you were a successful searcher. So, okay, you're in Dallas to search, right? Tell us. So, how old are you? What year is this? And to sort of give me the kind of sketch a picture of your search as you were kicking it off.
Yeah, so I want to share something about my psychology personally that I experienced, and maybe this resonates with some people. You hear that I went to business school to go really pursue or learn or evaluate whether I wanted to do a search, and I did spend time with 2 search CEOs who had successfully acquired companies. Groups, Lucas Braun and Ryan Robinson of OnRamp, based in Austin, and then Jim Vesterman of Raptor Technologies, based in Houston. And so during my 2 years at Wharton Business School, I got to spend time with those search CEOs and be right next to them. And I certainly had the experience of within the first 36 to 48 hours, I came home and I said, this is it. This is exactly what I need to do. So it kept, every time I pulled the thread from reading that initial search fund study from my colleague next to me on the desk in private equity to spending time shadowing really search CEOs, I kept feeling the calling get louder and louder. And what was interesting about that background is that when I graduated in 2016, so I was 30. I went into business school at 28. I graduated at 30, and I actually did a summer abroad at INSEAD in Fontainebleau, France. It was a sister school of Wharton, and I took the opportunity. I would recommend it to everybody to go do it. It was an awesome experience, meeting in a totally different class group and demographic profile if you do get that chance. So I actually finished in August of 2016. That was my technical graduation date. I came back. I took some time to think about going the full-time route, really assembling my my finances and everything, because I did spend my business school focusing on enjoying business school, making good friends, networking, and certainly those internship experiences. But otherwise, I didn't start searching while I was in business school. I know a lot of people try to do that. I didn't really attempt to do that. I wanted to make sure I enjoyed those 2 years. So towards the end of in the fall of 2016, I started a consulting entity to conduct independent consulting, doing market research projects or strategy projects. One of them was exploring the value chain, basically building out the value chain for a certain division of a large company that was backed by pretty large, well-known groups. And that's a lot of work. There's a reason they're outsourcing that work. It's tough, and there's no real end. You just have to keep going and figuring out the deeper and deeper elements of that value chain. So I started an independent consultancy in the fall of 2016 and continued that through the end of 2017 while I was ostensibly part-time searching. And that was the beginning of my search.
And was this because you needed to generate income? Why didn't you go full-time search at the get-go?
That was exactly right. So I thought that I had to have enough cash to 100% purchase the equity required for a business acquisition. So I had not heard of the concept of raising outside equity capital, especially significant amounts, over $1 million of equity capital for somebody who's, coming from a modest background and, maybe had some savings or a 401k from, early career years, but I don't have over $1 million in my bank account when I'm going out to search. And I don't think most searchers do. So, I wanted to build a base beyond my burn rate. I was single at the time, didn't have any other major financial commitments other than just a roof over my head and food, right? But needed to build up a base because I thought, well, it's easy. You just take 10% or divide by 10%, and that's the largest business purchase price you can afford. And so that's what I went forth and charted forward. I talked to a lot of people, a lot of other searchers, and I'll tell you, back in 2016, 2017, it just was not as heavily evangelized that there weren't groups, right? There weren't even formalized groups to raise equity capital for people.
So you were trying to not only support yourself, you had, your living expenses were low at the time. So, but cover that and then save 100, 200, 300, 400 or whatever you needed to get to buy a $2 or $4 million business. Okay.
I did that, Will, and I also liquidated my 401k, not at once, but over the search period. I basically called my 401k liquid. I said that thing is for search. And I had a reasonable amount in there, but for me, it was all in. And but that developed over time. I will say, for starting part-time search fall of 2016, beginning of 2017, and I acquired my company in the middle of 2020, there's a story there, right? I went through a psychological metamorphosis, if you will, of commitment. And for somebody who had gone into 2 years to ostensibly think about it and evaluate it and still come out and think, oh, well, I can do part-time. Let me do some part-time consulting while I'm searching. It developed a longer journey than it probably had to be, certainly.
That's so interesting. So what do you think? Yeah, I mean, and I'm glad you kind of made my point for me. So you were already drawn to it. It's kind of, you went into business school already knowing about it and saying to yourself, okay, I'm going to really learn something about search while I'm at Wharton. And then you come out and you're doing a part-time search. Why do you feel that you were not didn't have a sense of urgency about it? Why did it take you a long time to commit?
Yeah, so building up the capital base for what I thought I needed, and that's a big point because people just don't need as much cash as they think they need. They just need to cover their burn rate and save enough to be able to put in the minimal equity injection, not the whole thing. When you think about it that way, I thought I needed to earn more than I needed to earn to be able to go full time and just cut it cold, cut the independent consulting out and just shut it down. But I also did tell myself a story at that time. I said, which I think a lot of part-time searchers do tell themselves this story. Well, there's a lot of baby boomers. There's a silver wave, and especially if I'm looking for something between, let's say, $500,000 of SDE up to $1 million of SDE, that way below traditional search, way below private equity, and there's got to be just a ton of targets, and it shouldn't be that tough to just send out email campaigns and have brokers respond and send me deals, because I'm going to convince them that I'm the right operator and buyer, and they'll believe me because searching is great, and all the great should I say lies that one can tell oneself, right, when you're in the middle of a part-time search. That and I was putting hours in, but yeah.
So it was kind of like you thought it should be, ultimately, when you got serious about buying that business, that it shouldn't take that long because there's just going to be so many opportunities, and you were a qualified buyer. You had Wharton on your resume. It wasn't going to be that hard to convince whoever you needed to convince to be the buyer of that business. And so what you were underestimating was, in fact, how hard it was going to be to find the right target.
Coming from an institutional investing background where you have ultimate availability of every informational item, every data item you could ever dream of, and going into this market was definitely a rude awakening. So I figured that out firsthand. So remember, I did not intern with a searcher. I interned with search CEOs. So I had some conceptions around what I thought searching would be like, but most searchers who launch out don't. They don't intern with searchers. I do think it's valuable experience to see how tough it is. Go sit with somebody for a month or two, especially somebody who's in their first year, and watch how, in fact, I actually don't recommend sitting with somebody in their first year because they're still trying to figure everything out. Go in their second year. They probably have some processes down and in place, and they've learned a thing or two. They've gotten some bruises and cuts, which are healed over into scars or scabs and will make them stronger the next time they jump into the field and play the game. But it is way more brutal than I ever thought it would be. And I learned that over time, again, while I was part-time searching. So that's a big point. When you're part-time searching, your rate of learning is so much lower than if you're full-time throwing your whole body into the arena and getting torn to shreds. You throw yourself in there, you're going to come out and go, okay, I've got to change something tomorrow. In part-time search, it's like you discover that after a 2-week period. You say, oh, okay, I just learned something after 2 weeks that could have taken you one day if you were full-time searching. So I lived that firsthand for that first kind of year, a little over a year.
And when you said you were doing part-time, how part-time was it? I'm curious. Was it fully half part-time, 20 hours a week, or what?
So the issue with doing consulting as a part-time role, especially for high-level clients, Fortune 100 or 500 clients that are inherently demanding, you're basically as an outsourced arm of a multi-person team. So you're this this resource doing this special project. I would partition out maybe 20 hours a week, and it would become 30 or 35 because I would bid projects at a fixed price. And last time I checked, if you don't do a good job, it doesn't matter how much time it took. Your reputation's on the line as an independent consultant. So when in doubt, and when there was that natural search anxiety of looking at deals, or I looked at several SIMs, I killed them, had some broker calls. What else do I do with the rest of my day? Oh, I should go pick up that project. I should go take another draft review through it because it's due Friday. So it became a filler in many ways. Sometimes it would be part of my week where I could partition it out. And I felt other times it just crept in because it can always be better, right? Anybody who's put together a presentation or an Excel analysis knows that it's really never done. It's done when the project is over, when the deadline hits. So there were, it was really, there'd be weeks where you'd put 30, 35 hours into it. So your search would only get 5, 10 hours maybe. Well, I would definitely work more than the 40 hours. I was working maybe 60 to 70 a week. So that's another aspect as well, taking care of your psychology. So at that time, it was definitely a roller coaster for me. mentally to go through that. And imagine, right, you're trying to build a capital base while trying to pull down all these different deal overviews, and you're reviewing their finances and getting on seller calls, and nothing is hitting, and you're not even getting LOIs signed because you can't. You're looking at the deal and you're like, I can't even buy this company, but I spent 4 hours on it this past week, and that's just one company. And your sleep is suffering typically. I mean, you're not doing 40. You're typically doing more when you're taking on a part-time search and you're actually trying to do both well.
Yep.
And it makes you a worse searcher. It makes you a worse consultant. You end up being, if you have 3 jobs, right, you're just pulled 3 different directions. And
sure.
Something's got to give during that time period.
Yep. And okay, so when did you realize, or when did you decide to stop doing the consulting and go full time? Because ultimately your search did end up being a full time search. So what was that evolution?
So after about 12 months or so of essentially launching my self-funded search website and vehicle and getting out there and sending broker blasts of emails, I said, that's it. I think we got enough cash. Let's go. That plus the 401k being able to be liquidated was enough. And I also felt that kind of never-ending cycle of consulting where you kind of do projects, then you get paid, and you go do another project, and you get paid. And this is not what I wanted to do. That was not my dream, was to start my own consulting entity and build that from the ground up, doing special projects. I think that was really to develop the cash base. So it was really the fall of 2017, and I would say effectively January 1, 2018 was truly my first day of full-time searching and not looking back, and just saying, go from this point forward. Don't ever look back. No more consulting. I promised myself that was it, full-time.
Can you share what your financial position looked like what your 401k had and how much you were able to save up from the consulting?
I think the 401k was probably in the $80,000 to $90,000 range, and then consulting in 1 year made about $150,000. And so net of taxes, you think about that as cash in the bank that you're then able to deploy. Deploy out. That's the combination I had. And again, right, I thought I needed all of that to devote to a business purchase. I wasn't at that time thinking of anything really large. I was thinking, like a lot of people probably, let's go for something a little smaller, maybe $500,000 SDE, and build some experience. And it's not as much to bite off, a smaller team. I can manage this because it's the first time in my life that I would be actually managing my own team, managing my own business.
I mean, as many times as I've heard you say to me, both recorded and offline, that's a wrong-headed, I still feel the pull to do exactly that for all of those reasons. 500,000 in SDE seems good. Let me do this the first time, and then later I can be more ambitious, or the business that I acquire, I'll grow organically. So here you are, top of 2018. You've got $250,000 to help you out and buy a business. So how does it go? How do things change once you go from part-time to full-time?
So full-time, just even after the first few months, will talk to anybody who's made that transition from part-time to full-time. The only word is regret. You just look back and you look at your part-time. Put the financial position aside, right? I mean, there's a reason to build up a base. And if you truly have zero, you probably should build up a financial base before you do a self-funded search, because the chance that you're going to find an SBA deal that's going to require you to put in 10% of the equity check is reasonably high. So we talk about not going too small. The paradox is if you go too big, you're in commercial debt territory where they don't have that requirement. You don't have to put in a penny of your own money. We've helped someone do that, right, with Search Investment Group. But the chances are you're probably going to end up, and you could very likely end up in the SBA range, and you're going to have to put some money in. So put that aside for a second and think about it from that standpoint of, all right, if you have enough to be able to devote to an equity injection and you can cover your burn rate, there's nothing, I mean, of course, nobody would disagree with this, that there's nothing like doing something full time. You can that applies to really every avenue of life. You can do any other analogy, but I was able to move faster. I was able to form relationships with brokers. I was able to develop my processes better. So I tightened up my investment criteria checklist to be relevant to the market in which I was operating, as opposed to trying to bring in what initially was my private equity investment criteria checklist. And that was too rigid, right, for this space. You have to be a little more loose with some of those criteria or nothing will pass. And just the iteration, you talk about startups, like lean startups, you have to iterate and iterate over and over again, and you'll figure this out. So that just sped up immensely once I had launched full time, and it just kept going. I kept learning, I kept adapting and moving. Yeah.
And it was And so you had a target industry at this point. So during the part-time search, you'd already narrowed down an industry or industries that you were interested in?
No, actually, I was generalist. So I was going for anything that I felt like I could understand and would want to operate for 10 plus years. So that's a personal thing. Some industries you just don't want to touch. You're just personally not interested, and you couldn't get excited to get up out of your bed and show up to work and run in there with your arms over your head and lead a team. If you can't do that in an industry, just mark it off your list. Doesn't matter how beautiful the industry is or how great it is for investing. So I was looking at lots of different types of industries, logistics, third-party logistics. I really wasn't looking at healthcare, technology, software. I could talk about any one of these. There was, some of that logistics was distribution, professional services, certainly B2B. I also was interested in business to government services. My private equity position prior was government related acquisitions and government contractor type companies. And so I certainly was interested in that angle as well, but I didn't want to close myself off. There's that element of optionality that a lot of people still want to retain when they're doing a search, and you just open your opportunity set to a lot of different industries. You don't want to miss out, right?
So it's still so top of 2018, your search accelerates dramatically. You're iterating on your processes. So you're getting better and better and better at a much faster rate. But it's still not until 2.5 years later that you close on B&A. So kind of give us the kind of short version of those 2.5 years, particularly the low points, and I know there were some.
Yeah, so definitely iterated. I will say that having a generalist approach and you're just one person, right? So you're a single searcher. I had multiple classes of interns that were there to support me on special projects, but they can only do so much, right? They can't take a amorphous document and find those little things that are unique to that company that make it not able to survive in your process and therefore should be let go. They can fill out a criteria checklist, and I did have them do that sometimes, but even then, they would miss something, or they thought it was customer concentrated and it wasn't, or they thought it was, not recession resistant and it was. And so, it's hard to manage that process of trying to teach interns, but also gain value from them, from their contributions. So I did have teams of interns, but getting back to the point, you're one person. And if you're spreading yourself across multiple different industries and just saying, if I like it or if I fundamentally believe the industry is somewhat healthy, I'll take a look. I do think that probably negatively affected my deal flow at that time from brokers. I always say this, you never know what deals you're not getting shown. People only know what the pipeline is that they have. So I can go look at my CRM and say, look at all these deals, look at all these SIMs I'm looking at. But if you really graded it, how many of those SIMs are old or have been shopped around for a while and nobody's buying them? They're just left over on the market. How many of those have no business surviving at all and you're wasting your time? And how many deals are not in your CRM that could have been had you done something else that was more targeted with brokers or built relationships or, building out a proprietary deal flow sourcing, engine of sorts. So if I look back on that search, there were several deals I went down and chased that I should not have chased at all. I should have killed very early. And there were other deals I didn't chase, or I didn't feel like I could pay up on the valuation, that I look back and somebody else got that company and they locked it up. And the broker even called me before, or during LOIs being accepted, and said, you got to get your valuation up. There's two other buyers who are in this range. To be competitive, you got to get there, to give yourself a shot to get in front of the seller, and then the seller will decide who that person wants to work with, right? And sometimes it becomes a personal decision if they're all in the same valuation range. And I just didn't believe it. I thought, well, maybe the broker's just playing games, kind of thing.
Yeah.
Well, and of course, a month later, I hear that, or a couple months later, I hear that the company was sold successfully. And I see the searcher on LinkedIn, and he's doing really well. And I look back and I go, maybe that was a learning point. So I felt like
can you give us examples of both categories? So the businesses that you gave too much time to, and you could, and now being smarter, you would disqualify much earlier, and then the latter example that you just talked to, where you see now that you should have been willing to pay up for a particular company. Do the criteria that led you astray? Do you remember what they were?
Yeah. So the answer on companies that I chased that I should not have chased, that I should not have pursued or killed early, I would encourage, this is basically learning that I had, I would encourage basically trying to right size the actual operation of the company, because people have heard it before. You're not buying the history. You're not buying what the seller or the founder owner has been running. So that founder owner they may be the chief sales officer, the CFO, the CEO, the COO, the marketing person, the coder, the technologist. They're doing everything, right? And that's the history of the company. But what are you buying? You're buying, what you're going to step into and then build towards the future. There's a reason investors look at 5-year projections or 10-year projections or even 1 or 2 year projections. But you have to first, in that initial year, level set for what you have to do for the company to enable you to run it. So one example was I was really interested in a software company, a smaller one that had a nice niche product that did not have customer concentration, and had the potential to be able to be modernized, and yet had a really secure, sticky position with its customer base. I found one. It was just too small, and the CEO, founder, owner was doing everything that I mentioned. Right? They were doing everything under the sun, and only weeks and weeks later, after even doing an on-site visit, I visited them actually with an implementation of their software product with a customer, and I went back into the drawing board and I looked at it. There was several $100,000 of hiring I had to do, and in addition, technological debt. So the downside of being able to modernize a software product into a cloud version from an on-premise version is that costs money. That costs a lot of money.
Oh yeah,
and
sure.
You look at that, now the EBITDA is negative. So really this is a growth equity investment. It's more akin to maybe VC than it is to private equity, which is essentially what search funds are. I mean, it's micro private equity. You have to buy cash flow. So sure, the book says it had, I think it was $750,000 of cash flow. That's not true. Not going forward. You just can't, the on-premise solution was falling apart, and yet customers were staying with it, which was great. But you can't do that forever. So that was one example.
Yeah, those modernization opportunities, you have to ask yourself, is it inexpensive to modernize this? Is it the classic getting rid of the fax machine and putting in Google Cloud or whatever, or is it our G Suite or whatever? Or in the case of moving from on-prem software to cloud, is the modernization an enormous undertaking? And not only financial, but just, that's ripping the guts out of the software product. And so you got to be honest with yourself about that. Go ahead.
Yeah. So that's a good example, Will, of a company where doing some fundamental things up front, and I also having somebody who was going to be brutally honest with me about hey, did you do this? Did you look at this? Because I had never looked at acquiring a small software company before, sub $1 million of cash flow. I'd never done that. Most searchers have never done these things. They've never looked at a third-party logistics company and a landscaping company. They don't know what they're really looking at first. You got to see a couple to get a sense of what's good and what's not good. And very quickly, you just finish 12 months. So the search goes by really fast, and you have to iterate while balancing your learning with decision making under uncertainty. So I tried to do that. Learned some hard ways on those things. So I had spent real diligence money on that deal, and I actually submitted the first draft of the purchase agreement to the seller. I heard crickets for 3 days. In the middle of the night, on Wednesday night, I got an email that said, "Hello, Jordan. I have decided to no longer sell my company. Thank you for all your efforts. Regards." And this was kind of around when I was also having that sense of, well, I can make this work. I can make it work, right? Psychologically, you convince yourself, yeah, it may be expensive, but there's probably a way to modern, or let's do a half modernization. And once we get enough cash flow, then we'll actually truly do a rewrite of the software. So I just felt like I could just staple it together. And I think a lot of searchers do convince themselves of that. They tell themselves the story. This is such a great company because it did have some good attributes. But anyway, I think I'm mixing the timeline up a little bit here. But the point is that I had spent real money with the attorneys. I had spent real money on the quality of earnings, and it was gone. The seller can at any time just decide they don't want to sell anymore for just no reason.
Yeah. But in fact, in retrospect, I mean, this is an example of one of the deals that you looked at that you're glad didn't close.
Yes.
So it was a blessing in disguise. Yeah.
Yeah, I would have probably been suffering trying to box my way out of a brown paper bag. And really, that's I think what it feels like when you have just a couple $100,000 of cash flow. Oh yeah, by the way, you have an SBA loan to pay, and you're struggling between being able to afford that travel to a customer or devoting it to paying a salesperson the minimal possible salary to get them on board. And that would not be fun to fight.
Yeah. When you now going back to the deals that did go well for their successful buyers, the guy who posted on LinkedIn, and you can see that he's doing really well. What had you missed about that business? Like, why did you not think that slightly heftier valuation was justified?
Yeah. So the business I'm thinking about is a blue collar services business in a city. Think of like window washing, that type of thing, and had a lot of good basic things that we know are good search deals, no customer concentration, reasonable sized team, and I believe it had a little under $1 million in cash flow, and I believe it was going for 5 times, and I just thought, my gosh, that's a lot of money to spend for a smaller deal. Maybe it was $800,000 of cash flow, something like that, and I just felt, wow, that's just really expensive. There's no way that people are willing to pay that for a blue collar services business that is got to be kind of hard to grow. I mean, labor wise, and you have price sensitivity from the customers, and they start asking for discounts because if you're going to do my other building, then that means I want a volume discount, and so you just have all this, and then the risk, right, of those people getting injured and the lawsuit risk. I just couldn't believe that a business like that was truly going to go for 5 times, and I was thinking 3 to 4. So I didn't pursue it, but you can do very well with those businesses. And when I look back, the 2 reasons I didn't pursue it was, number one, I felt I didn't have enough cash equity personally to be able to cover it. But number 2, I felt like that would have put me at risk. I felt a 5x multiple of EBITDA was going to over capitalize the company with debt, over lever it. And I hear that from searchers. They get a little sensitive around putting too much debt because the SBA will let you do 90% financing. And for a lot of people, that sounds kind of crazy, right? So you can do the models and the math, but it just, yeah.
Well, I don't know, Jordan. It sounds like your thought process was prudent. I mean, 5x for a blue collar business, that is expensive. And so it's gone well for the buyer, and I'm glad to hear that. But maybe it's gone well because of his good fortune, and really the chances that it was going to go well were pretty slim. And you were right to pass on the deal, and he's just got he had a little bit of luck since he's bought the business. I mean, 5x for blue collar business sounds pretty rich, and doesn't leave much margin for error on your loan.
Yeah, the company though had everything else going for it. Again, no customer concentration, a stable operations team, a good culture. Everything really else it had going for it. And the thing with these businesses is you don't really see a lot of right? You see, these are a bunch of terrible businesses in this industry. And you see one that's okay, and it's hard as a searcher to think, is that a great business for this industry, or is that just a little bit better than okay? So, without getting into extreme detail here, it was a really good business for a smaller blue collar services business, and had good growth to it. Actually had pretty good margins, but I just couldn't get comfortable, especially when I see blue collar services businesses with such good margins. I wonder, is that temporary? Is there some impact around the corner? But definitely 5 is expensive. 5 times is definitely expensive. But I guess my search could have been theoretically shorter had I won that. Had I put an offer in. And if you don't put an offer in, you won't even get a chance to pursue it.
Jordan, you said you had teams of interns. They were doing, it sounds like deal analysis, industry analysis. Were they also doing any proprietary outreach? Were you doing proprietary outreach?
I was doing proprietary outreach. I used the interns to help clean some lists. I went to public library. They have A to Z databases of business names categorized by NAICS code and SIC code. I found out through calling that those NAICS and SIC codes, and sometimes they didn't have websites. So that's all you really could go off of. So you either call or do an email. A lot of times those were just wrong, right? They're just completely miscategorized. But we would also send the names and the website addresses, if they did have a website, to an outsourced overseas team to gather and find out which emails were deliverable. And I created a drip campaign of emails to those business owners to see if I could, get them. And usually on about the 6th, 7th, or 8th email, where it was like, hey, checking in. I know you've seen my emails before. I just want to get 10 minutes for a call just to see if you would be open to selling your business, and then a brief little overview of myself. And that's when sometimes it would hit. The 7th one, they said, okay, you got me. And it was just a drip campaign. So it was automated sending out. Those, I didn't have a ton of good fortune from proprietary searching, but I will say some initial calls with business owners in industries was incredibly enlightening. The ones that weren't even selling. I talked to for example, an asphalt striping and power washing business owner. And he said, why do you want to buy a company in this industry? And I told him all some reasons of why I thought it could be lucrative or attractive. And he said, no, it is incredibly competitive. There's always price pressure. It's hard to keep your people. This has been one of the hardest things I've ever done. And even that, I'm eking out in this metro area, maybe a 5% annual growth rate. And I'm clawing tooth and nail to do that. And my margin is eroding. And I just said, valuable. Okay. And I said, thanks very much. I appreciate your insight. I mean, I was just having a conversation. He said, yeah, sure, man. I'm just, I just was curious why you were interested in buying a business in this industry. So that's where some of those conversations were most helpful, if not, for buying an actual business.
Absolutely. God, that would be so valuable to have a business owner tell you something like that. On the other hand, I feel like a lot of the industries that people in search buy into, like landscaping, I'm sure you have a lot of owners that feel that way, that if you got them on the phone, they'd say the same thing. Landscaping, are you kidding? It's brutal out here. And yet you and I both know a lot of people who have successfully acquired landscaping businesses are doing really well with them. So, as with all things, it's tricky. You got to be careful not to over-index on one person's, experience. All right, Jordan. So you didn't have a great success with proprietary, but you were doing some. When did things get, really? Where did you get really discouraged? Because I know you did.
The losing the LOI or losing the deal that was under LOI, that wasn't the only one. There was another one as well. I talked about the software deal, but there was another deal that had under LOI that I was spending accounting, CPA, quality of earnings money on. And that one, I found some things that just I had to kill the deal over. And just every time you lose an LOI, the later the stage it is, the more damaging it is to the searcher's psyche. And we say searcher, these are people. I mean, I was a human doing this, and you're alone, and nobody has a vested interest in your search. I mean, you can talk to your buddies, but they're busy. You know, they go to work and they have a job and they get a bonus and they have a 401k and health insurance, and you can talk to, you know, your significant other. And they can just say, oh, that's unfortunate, or it's too bad, or let's just, you know, go get something to eat or something. But they don't understand what you're going through. And the seller doesn't care. They moved on, or you had to tell them the bad news. So you had to make that judgment call and maintain discipline during your search. But it still hurts either way, because you look back and you think, did I just waste 3 months of my life really devoting all my time and effort? Because you're one person, right? You're a one-person deal team. And so it takes all that. And to pick that up and just get back to sourcing, or pick it back up from wherever it was, maybe only 20% of your time was doing sourcing while you had your deal under LOI, it just feels like you went back to square zero. It feels like you didn't learn anything. In reality, you did learn something, but make no mistake, by definition, you lost time. You lost that 3 months of your search. So
and you said that, you know, you had maybe kept up 20% of your time was devoted to continued deal sourcing. Do you recommend that percentage of people's time? Because you hear this a lot, that, you know, people get just fixated on the deal that's right in front of them, and they forget to keep their deal engine going, which is really important, because that deal that they're so excited about and looking at could very well fall apart. So what's the right amount of attention you should continue to give to your deal sourcing while you're working on a deal?
Yeah, so I think it's actually much, much higher. And we at Search Investment Group really encourage our searchers that are working with us in partnership. We encourage them to, let's say you just get a deal under LOI, you should be sourcing 60% plus of your week should be sourcing. Wow. And as you continue down that path, the pendulum should swing, or the bifurcation of that time and attention should slowly erode into maybe 50% sourcing down to 40% as you get closer. You think about it, I think the LOI to close rate in self-funded search, or let's say between, you know, even $1 to $3 million of EBITDA, is actually 10% maybe. So 10% of those LOIs, maybe less, actually get to closing. For any number of reasons, right? You could identify something in diligence early on. Oh, that's why that business can't be sold. Or something happens on the seller side. There's a range of different things that could happen. But I think it's about 10% or less. So if you get multiple deals under LOI, and we do support people to be able to do that, because you can't just keep doing 10% bets in succession. So if you get 3 deals under LOI, maybe your sourcing component is less than 60%. Maybe it's 40%. Yeah. That's because you're chasing 2 other deals. You got 2 other deals you have to work on and get term sheets on, and do business and market diligence and move fast. And that's a lot of work. You're not going to be sleeping. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So how did you find BNA?
I was reached out to, I was in the Dallas area searching, and there's a Dallas area broker who wouldn't post to public domains. There was no Interexo or Axial or BizBuySell posting for this opportunity. He really did larger deals. He would do more private equity sized business sales as a sell side investment banker / business broker. And this was a smaller one, and he took it on anyway because he said, as I learned, he liked the sellers. He felt that they were really great people, and he thought the business was interesting and unique. And anyway, I kept up good relationships with investment bankers and brokers who were even upsized a little bit from what I was looking at. And I reached out to him. I said, "Do you have anything?" It was just part of my standard broker outreach emails. He said, "Actually, I think I do." And this was in the fall of 2019. And he just I went into the office and he told me about a company, and he didn't name any names or anything, but he gave some high-level overviews of it. And I said, "That does sound kind of interesting." And he said, "Yeah, I think I'm learning about this whole searcher space. I think it's good for a searcher. I think this would fit." And so I said, "I'm very interested. Keep me posted." And I believe it was the beginning of 2020, about January, he put out the confidential information memorandum. And I took a look at it, and I got to say, initially, I just said, "Is this the right business for me?" I mean, it's like local government services. It seems like you have to get to know the staff at city government. I don't have any background in city government. How am I going to form relationships with city managers and department heads of public works? And it just felt like something that somebody else should buy.
Yeah.
And I was very close to just passing on it for that reason alone.
Yeah.
Just thinking I was going to have a very low crossover.
Yeah.
So that's how I found it. Yeah.
Well, and so how did you, and so how did you convince yourself to give it another look, or to open your mind to the possibility of getting into it?
Yeah.
Also, going back to your earlier point about like you should be excited. Not only do you have the qualification, or can you figure the industry out, but it should turn you on. Did the idea of local business services and grant services do that?
I did like government-facing services. I should say the company also has a small software product, so it kind of scratched that earlier itch of wanting to. That other software company that I had that bad experience on was a local government-facing software company. So I love the customer base. I love the idea of serving, especially municipal government, because instead of serving the federal government, you have multiple customers. You have multiple potential. I mean, there's hundreds of cities in Texas alone, and they're all small, but they all need the same type of service or software product depending on the price point, and you can modulate that depending on the size of the city. So I think it's really interesting. I did always find that it was one of my bullets, if you will, on my one pager that I would share with brokers was government-facing services, or government-facing software. It was certainly of interest, but at the time, I was thinking of it more from a standpoint of, I thought a lobbyist maybe would need this because it was grant funding opportunities. And I thought, well, isn't that kind of messy? Don't you have to kind of get to know people and network and find how the money flows between different governments? It just sounded kind of messy. And I started convincing myself that maybe this one's not it. Maybe this is not the thing. And what saved me was talking with as one or two advisors and asking them, posing those questions to them. Do you think this is something that I can't handle because of it would require somebody to have come from the city government arena? Yep. And they really encouraged me to continue looking at it. And so I kept going. And the more I kept going, the more I got interested during that process. And at a certain tipping point, I just said, I want to buy this business. Meeting the sellers was great too, because I had learned at that point in my search the integrity of the founder owner you're working with, and that gut feeling, that instinct you get when you talk to them is hard to teach to a searcher. But if you get that feeling that somebody is actually has a very pure interest in the kind of buyer they're looking for, and why they're doing this, why they're selling, and all these other things, and what they truly want to do once they do sell, and they're taking this personally, that's a good thing. And I found it was very unique from that standpoint. The sellers of this business were spectacular.
Mm-hmm. And you met with them in person then, because this is a virtual business, correct?
It is 100% remote services and software business, and yet it was operated out of a suburb in North Texas. From the founder owner's home, and we did meet in person. So we went under LOI in February of 2020, and the deal ended up closing in July 2020. So in between those months, there was quite a bit of activity going on. We did have meetings in person, but they were social distance. They were masked at my attorney's office or the sell side business brokers' offices. it was hard to communicate. It was hard to kind of get close and really even shake hands, right? It was a tough time to make that shift from in-person trust building to, well, I'm in person, but I can't even see half your face type of thing. But
what a time to do your first big deal. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's, we did get to meet in person, but I wanted to take them to lunch. I wanted to take them to dinner, and I couldn't because of the situation.
Yeah. Yeah. And Jordan, give us a little bit more detail on what B&A does. We've danced around it, but speak directly to it, please.
Yeah, so B&A Grant Services and Software started in 2000. The founder owner was a soon-to-be mother who had to leave her city government job in California, who had written grants on behalf of the city to seek funding from state and federal sources to fund key projects. So those could be infrastructure projects, it could be firefighter equipment or vehicles, or low-income community centers. It could be really anything that the city needs to do that local tax revenue alone does not cover, and the city needs to be the one that does it. Let's say rehabilitating a road or intersection signage or things like that, or building sidewalks in low-income communities so that people can actually walk on the sidewalk and not in the middle of the street and potentially get in an accident. So she did that on the side as a ancillary duty, and she was very good at it. So when she had to leave the city to have her first child, they called her and said, "Can you please keep writing grants for us? We would love for you to do that. You're so good at it." And she said, "Sure." And little did she know at that time that became a business. And then she hired a friend to help her do some grant writing as she got more activity. Then the city referred her to another city that was looking for somebody. And it just built from there. So 2000 all the way to 2020, when I got an opportunity to purchase the business, it had just grown organically. I'm pretty sure they had never taken on debt. It was just cash flow, organic growth over time, and built up to about 22 people at the time that I purchased it in July 2020.
22 people, and can you share any numbers around financial numbers? So what the revenue was and how profitable or what the margins were? And if the EBITDA was, if you could share that.
Yeah, so I can give, the revenue was in about $2.4, $2.5 million of annual revenue, and is pretty healthily profitable. We had about 40% margins at an EBITDA level, really because it was professional services, and there's a lot of underlying elements of the different aspects of what we provide. So we have grant research to help cities find grants and identify those that fit their key projects that according to their 5-year strategic plan. And then you, of course, have to have somebody write them to develop these 40-page, very detailed, essentially, think of them as very detailed Word documents with all sorts of statistics and maps and schematics. And then we do grant management. Once the grant has been awarded to the city, you have to administer that over a period of years, right? It doesn't just come to you in one check. The granting agency pays it out over time according to you hitting certain stage gates and milestones and reporting requirements. So it's a full life cycle company. And so it had pretty good margins and about $2.4 million of revenue and about 22 people at the time. As of right now, we're almost 2 years in. It's June of 2022, and we're on track to be at about 3.5 million of revenue.
Phenomenal.
Yeah.
So what is that? Doing my math here.
Yeah.
What is that? 40% growth in 2 years?
Yeah, it's about almost 50% growth. Yeah.
That's amazing. That's great.
Yeah, so we're up to 30
Jordan,
people now and about 50% growth. Yeah.
And is that through? Well, let me put a pin in that question. I want to ask more about growth in a second. But first, couple of things. When you were doing your part-time search and you were doing consulting, and really not enjoying consulting, and saying to yourself, I didn't set out to start a consultancy and grow a consultancy. That's not what I want to be doing. Here you are, effectively, you own a consulting business, right? So can you square that circle for me?
Yeah, absolutely. So my role in this company is to support the team to enable them to be successful, to design new initiatives to help recruit and retain talent, to create new business opportunities to serve our clients better, to be more efficient with our resources. And that's my job. I do not know how to actually be a grant consultant. I've never done grant research. I've never written a grant. It's a great question. I actually think it was a good background when you think about it. And I did utilize that when I talked with the sellers. I said, hey, I ran my own consulting entity for a whole year, before I focused full time. So that actually came back to help, because they said, oh, that's interesting. That's really great. So you know how hard it is to win clients and to perform for clients and how demanding clients can be. And I said, yes, I do.
Yeah, totally.
I think it helped in a weird way with getting this one. But it's a great company. It has a wonderful culture. It is predominantly women operated, and it's just a spectacular group of people that do really great work, and they're passionate about it. It's mission oriented. You're really helping communities develop things that they wouldn't have otherwise been able to do. So,
and to your point about not knowing how to be a grant consultant, so that is a big characteristic of search in general, is that searchers acquire businesses that oftentimes are coming completely from outside the industry. Former investment banker buying a plumbing company, as an example, or in your case, a grant consulting business. So, how did you? Yes, I understand that your role is not to be a grant consultant and write grants, but at the same time, all of your staff, or a large percentage of your staff, that is what they're doing. So, was there any part of you that made you a little bit uncomfortable, or how do you deal with that? Because you got to be able to speak the language of your employees, do you not? So, how does Jordan Carter deal with that?
So I certainly dove in and looked at all the materials. I had my first 90 plus days was listening to people all across the organization of what they do, what it's like. When you jump into something like this, I felt like I was very much a pupil. I was learning from who was the vice president at the time, and the sellers, right? They were sticking around, and I just said, okay, tell me everything I need to know. Let's break this up into kind of a learning program so that I can train into understanding what I need to know about this business. It was opaque at first. I was like, grants, municipal grants, what is this all about? I didn't even know this industry existed.
So niche. Yeah, I didn't either. Yeah.
But I will say though, you're going to undergo this training process no matter what company you buy. Unless you came from that industry directly. So if you came from, plumbing or landscaping, you're going to jump right in there. You know exactly which levers to pull, but most searchers don't. It's the first time they've jumped into that industry, and you're going to have to just learn it over time. So I wouldn't even say it wasn't as tough to learn as I thought it was when I was first looking at the materials. I just thought I would never learn it. But I've gotten, yes, because I've had to talk directly with clients with nobody else on the phone about what we're able to do and resolve issues, and certainly you have to be credible and be able to have a background on it. So
and the credibility piece also just comes into play with your people, and I think that the classic approach to this is what you said. When you acquire the business, you just come in with humility. Really a learner's mindset. You say, I'm here to learn from you all who are, making this business function. And it sounds like from all of my guests that approach generally works. That even though you don't know anything, if you're eager to learn, your new employees will be, eager to help get you up to speed. But I suspect there's still some people who feel like a searcher, a new acquirer of their business who's coming from the outside the industry, see them as opportunistic, or that they just don't have the cred and what have you. And I just wonder if in a business like yours, that's actually the mission is a big part of why people work at that business. If you didn't bump up against that more than, say, if I bought a landscaping company, that people that work at B&A really are motivated to, help local governments. And so they just might not be as open-minded to we capitalists as people in other industries. You follow me?
I do. So the way I communicated this was the only way I really knew how. And I think it's probably the right path for most other searchers as well when they step into businesses in this situation. I told them the truth about exactly how I see myself fitting into the team. That I'm not here to become this world-class expert of identifying and writing grant opportunities, or identifying opportunities and writing beautiful proposals that win. I cannot do that. But what I can do is, as I explained, Will, support them. I can enable them to be healthier, happier. I did some things early on. I know a lot of searchers tell stories of this, search CEOs. They say, oh, I fixed this one thing that was in the technology stack or in their workflow. And they said, oh my gosh, thank you so much for fixing that.
Yeah.
You're producing value. You're helping make my day better. And I one of those things was we had just an extreme amount of detail on the timesheets that was required from our consultants to submit their time. It had to be like multiple. I mean, you should see some of these timesheets. It was paragraphs explaining what they did over a 45-minute period. And it was almost as if it was a product in and of itself. And that would then be cleaned up, proofread, and printed for the clients. And it wasn't easy to unhook, but just focusing on that as a pain point for really the entire team and solving it and making it much more streamlined. I got it to be a drop-down box. You just click, drop down, click it, boom, go to the next one. Log your next time log. And they just said, for months afterwards, they kept saying, thank you. That was amazing. I really appreciate it.
Wow.
So just showing
a win.
Yeah, showing that you have a value to contribute that is not their value, that it's different, and that your job is to support them. That's how I feel about it.
That's great.
They got it. And I big credit to them for adapting through that change, because it is hard.
Yeah. Jordan, we're coming down to the wire here, but you mentioned the growth, and one of the tweaks, what you just mentioned, the tweak that you made to improve the business. This doesn't sound like a business where modernization was the big thesis of what you could do as the CEO. It sounds like the opportunities were elsewhere. So were there opportunities? How has this 40% or 50% growth in the last 2 years come? Tell me quickly what has happened over the last 2 years for you to get the success?
Cities have to outsource this service, and cities have to outsource it because it is typically very rarely used. You don't need a full-time grant writer unless you are a large city, in which case they have 3 to 4 or 5 people. They have a grant department. So most cities in the United States, by absolute number, cannot justify the cost of having a full-time employee focused on grants. And even if you did, that one person will only have so much experience over one career. We deploy a team-based approach, pulling from across water, parks and rec, public works, fire, police. Just public health. So just across all those different arenas, we have experts of each that have gotten experience that are able to tactically deploy that experience for the client as we see fit, as we need to. So I say this to say that the cities can't afford it, and it's hard to build that experience in such a niche area. Most of grant writing is nonprofit focused, and it's much less technical in that arena. Municipal grant writing is much more technical and difficult and strenuous to do, and very demanding, and all the fun things about client service that become very tough on the actual consultants and can burn them out. So the marketplace for competitors here is actually very small. There's only a few people, a few small, similar sized businesses to ours that are doing this. And it's because it sometimes does take 20 years to build reasonable scale enough to actually be worthy of being able to self-fund that cash flow into future growth opportunities. So all this to say, there are a lot of opportunities to create new service lines and to also sell our existing service lines into other cities just by doing good work and continuing the mission. And that's special because most market niches, most industries, there's lots of competition. Everybody's competing on price.
Yeah.
And you can't get attention of the decision maker. And yet we can. And if anything, we just need more people. We need more great grant writers who want to make this a passion. And with that, I'm confident that we can go out there and go talk to cities and sell the service, which is essentially getting them sometimes 60, 70. We have a few clients that are getting 100 times return on their investment. For every dollar they spend with us, they're getting 100 times of that $100 back through winning grant awards. We don't get compensated off that, but that's our measure of success.
And so a lot of this growth that you've seen in the last couple of years has been Jordan doing more proactive sales, or just kind of industry tailwinds because there's just demand for what you guys are offering, and it's kind of been organic.
There's so much demand that didn't change. There's way more demand than we can serve, but I've moved several people around in the company that expressed to me that they didn't feel comfortable in their position and they wanted to do something else. And that actually unlocked a good value opportunity. For example, one person was positioned as a manager, and yet she really just wanted to do business development. I put her in business development in January of this year, and she's just hit it out of the park. Tapping into what someone really wants to do within our company, as long as it adds value and is contributive to the mission, I'm supportive of. And I've told the whole team that. If you want to do something different, tell me, let me know. Let's see what we can do. And certainly it's got to be something related to grants, but you can be a researcher, you can be a writer, you can be an administrative manager, you can be a people manager, or you can be in sales, you can be in marketing. So I want people to lean into those natural, desires. So that actually helped unlock a good portion of it. And then, just getting out to clients and evaluating our book of business across the board and saying, what can we do to serve more with our existing platform? We have a research product that is actually scalable. So selling that into the existing channels doesn't create that much incremental more work, but is inherently valuable to all those little cities in the state of California, for example. They all want access to that targeted research, which is a really good product that we have internally. So it's a mix of things there.
Great. Jordan, at the top when we were talking about your search, you said a couple of times that you didn't realize, like you felt that you needed to have all the cash that was going to go to the equity piece of the acquisition, and that you were mistaken in that. And obviously, SIG, the group that you're part of with Robert Graham and others, is a source of equity capital for searchers today. And so SIG exists out there for searchers like Jordan Carter of 2016, 2017 to work with. Are there a lot of options? Like what would you tell, like, let's take SIG out of it. Did Jordan Carter have what other opportunities to go and get that capital did he have that he didn't realize? Because you're making it sound like you were really naive, and that there's a lot more capital out there that maybe searchers who aren't super sophisticated about the space don't realize.
Well, I really do think, Will, that the standing up in just the past few years of groups that are committed to solving that equity question is the game changer. Because otherwise you have to patchwork piece it together yourself. And I actually have a story there. In May, June 2020, I tried to do it myself, right? SIG did not exist. There was no search investment group. I did it myself. I contacted every investor I possibly could on searchfunder.com. I'm sure you all know that website. Every single investor, I emailed them. I got a hold of every single one of them. I had an Excel sheet tracking of all of them. And of those Zoom calls, let's say they were 45-minute to an hour Zoom calls each, less than 1 out of 10 actually was even close to the finish line when we were raising equity. When we were calling the equity into, people actually had to do the wires into the bank account to fund the transaction. So it was very, and part of that was, there's some little investor tire kicking. People say they're investors, they're not investors, and they hide that they're not really actually investing, they're just looking at the asset class. And the other part was people who just wanted an outsized portion of the equity. They wanted 45% or 40% of the common equity on the equity raise. And I said, look, I'm not going for that, and I was at the time looking to raise debt at a 15% conversion to common equity, where I would have 85%. So we were just way off. And they just said, look, if you get more realistic, then come back to me. And the bigger the check, I'm talking even like a little bit over $100,000, the more power they kind of threw around over that phone call, over that Zoom call. So I personally had a very, I would say, brutal equity raise process myself, trying to just punch it myself. There's that common element through my search of I try to do it myself, try to do this other thing myself, and I just learned. On the other side of the chasm, I look back and I go, was there an easier way? I think some searchers spend time trying to build investor relationships, piece by piece, one by one, just have those connections. But you never know how they're going to react until you show them your deal and you show them what you're asking for on the equity side. So I actually think it's a waste of time to try to build investor connections. I talked to plenty of investors, and I had known many of them from prior calls because I did the same thing all other part-time and full-time searchers do. Every now and then call some investors. So I don't know, Will. It's hard to say because you're right. At the time, there really wasn't anywhere else to go. You either patch it together yourself or you just go buy a small business and fund your own equity check 100% of it. That's what I felt was available. That's not the same since then or the past 2 years.
And so obviously the origin of SIG was your vision to kind of fill this gap in the market.
So that was my first half of the equity raise, was me punching my way out of a corner, right? And Robert and I had known each other from a prior Texas Search Group networking event. And I was talking to him about my deal. And I said, I got one under LOI and I'm just having trouble getting equity lined up. And he said, maybe I can help you out. And so he lended some of his investor contacts for me to make warm intros and reach out to them. And the hit rate went from 1 out of 10 on Search Funder or less to 7 or 8 out of 10. And before we knew it, we got the equity raise completed. So that was really the first Search Investment Group deal, was my company. Yeah. So I felt like I did everything the hard way, and then I figured out the better way. And so, Will, you asked that question of, if you talk to the previous Jordan, what would you say to him or counsel? Yeah. I feel like I'm talking to previous Jordans every day. Every time I talk to a self-funded searcher or prospective self-funded searcher, a lot of them are coming from the same mindset I had back in 2016 or 2017 or 2018, and thinking that they can just figure it out themselves and go with themselves. And I just look at that and I say, are you ready for this? Do you want to do potentially 2.5 years? Maybe you'll be faster, right? But the inertia and the history, the track record of searching, of how brutal it is, says you probably are not going to be. You're probably going to have to learn it the hard way, because that's the only way to do it if you don't take outside counsel, if you don't take outside guidance.
Yeah.
Which is what I did.
Jordan, we got to cut it there just because we've gone over time. But I feel like you're a great resource, and somebody who went through their own very painful search, and then, as you said, now is talking to other searchers all the time. You just have really deep perspective on self-funded search. What's the best way for people to reach out to you?
Yeah, you can just check out our website, searchinvestgroup.com. There's all sorts of great info there, and then recently got on Twitter, so Jordan P. Carter.
Okay, Jordan P. Carter on Twitter.
You encouraged
all
me
these links
to get on Twitter, so I joined.
Great. How are the followers?
Oh, I don't think I've probably got like 20 at this point, but plan on putting out some good content. And really, the reason we started SIG was to help other people, help my former self, really.
Yeah.
And I hope some of that stuff is helpful too. We can put out some good content.
Yeah. Well, Jordan, thanks for coming on and sharing your story. That was a really great deep dive into a painful search, and it seems like kind of an earlier time in search, because, as you said, a lot of things have changed since 2016, 17, 18. But you have scars from the experience, but you're obviously very, very wise about the whole process today. So appreciate you coming on. Sure, I'll have you back again at some later date. And until next time, thank you very much, sir.
Thanks again, Will. It was always good to be with you.